My granddaughter looked me dead in the eye and said, "Face it, Grandma, you're done. We're putting you in a home whether you like it or not." She slammed the folder of nursing home brochures on my kitchen table like she was delivering a death sentence. What she didn't know was that I had already signed new papers that morning, and by tomorrow, everything they thought they owned would belong to someone else entirely. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Connie Murphy, and at 73 years old, I thought I knew what betrayal looked like. I buried my husband Patrick 15 years ago after 42 years of marriage. I raised 3 children on a teacher's salary while he worked double shifts at the steel mill. I watched my savings account shrink every time one of them needed help with a mortgage payment, car repair, or medical bill. I gave them everything I had, including the Victorian house on Maple Street that Patrick and I restored board by board in the early years of our marriage. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the conversation I had with my family on that gray Tuesday afternoon in October. I was in my kitchen making apple cinnamon bread when I heard car doors slamming in my driveway. Through the lace curtains, I could see my daughter Rebecca's silver SUV parked behind my son Michael's truck. My stomach tightened because they never visited together unless something was wrong. When my youngest, David, climbed out of the passenger seat of Rebecca's car, I knew this wasn't a social call. I wiped my flour-covered hands on my apron and walked to the front door, my arthritis making each step a small reminder that I wasn't the woman who used to chase these same children around this same house 30 years ago. Rebecca was already on the porch, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the afternoon light, her designer purse clutched in her manicured hands like armor. "Hi, Mom," she said, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Michael nodded at me from the walkway, his work boots scuffing against the stone path Patrick had laid himself. David hung back by the car, looking anywhere but at me. "Well, this is a surprise," I said, stepping aside to let them in. "I was just baking. The bread should be ready in 20 minutes if you want to stay." Rebecca walked past me into the living room, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors I had just finished polishing that morning. "Actually, Mom, we need to talk to you about something important." The way she said it made my chest tighten. I followed her into the living room where she was already settling into Patrick's old recliner, the one I still couldn't bring myself to move even after all these years. Michael sat heavily on the couch, his calloused hands clasped between his knees. David remained standing near the doorway like he was ready to bolt. "Sit down, Mom," Rebecca said, gesturing to my own couch like she was the hostess in my home. "I'll stand, thank you," I replied, crossing my arms. "What's this about?" Rebecca exchanged glances with her brothers, some silent communication passing between them that excluded me entirely. She opened her purse and pulled out a manila folder, thick with papers. "We've been talking," she began, her voice taking on that patronizing tone she used with her teenage daughter. "And we're worried about you?" I felt my eyebrows rise. "Worried about me? Why?" Michael cleared his throat. "Mom, you're getting older. This house is too big for you. You shouldn't be living alone anymore." "I'm 73, not 93, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "And I've been living alone just fine for 15 years. "Have you?" Rebecca leaned forward, her blue eyes narrow with concern that felt more like accusation. "Mrs. Henderson called me last week. She said she saw you in your nightgown in the front yard at 2 a.m. My face flushed hot. I was checking on my roses. Someone had been stealing them, and I heard a noise. "In your nightgown, Mom, at 2 a.m. Rebecca's voice was getting louder. "That's not normal behavior. Since when is protecting my property not normal?" I snapped back. David finally spoke up from the doorway, his voice quiet but firm. "Grandma, so you forgot Thanksgiving last year." The words hit me like a physical blow. I had forgotten Thanksgiving. I had spent the entire day wondering why no one called, only to remember at 6 p.m. that I was supposed to host dinner. By the time I called Rebecca, they had already eaten at her house. "That was one time," I said weakly. "One time too many," Rebecca replied, opening the folder. "We've looked into some really nice places. Sunny Meadows has a beautiful garden, and Riverside Manor has activities every day." "You'd make friends," You'd be safe. Safe? I stared at her. I'm perfectly safe in my own home. Are you? Michael's voice was gentle but insistent. Mom, what if you fall? What if you have a medical emergency? What if you forget to turn off the stove? I've never forgotten to turn off the stove. Yet, Rebecca said, and that one word hung in the air like a verdict. I looked around the room, at the family photos covering every surface, at the Afghan my mother had crocheted draped over the back of the couch, at the wedding portrait of Patrick and me hanging above the fireplace. This house wasn't just where I lived. It was where I had loved, where I had raised my children, where every corner held a memory that kept me tethered to the life I had built. No, I said firmly, I'm not going anywhere. Rebecca's mask of concern slipped, revealing something harder underneath. Mom, we're not asking, we're telling you. David's already put down a deposit at Sunny Meadows. I whirled around to face my youngest son, the boy I had rocked to sleep every night for the first 2 years of his life, because he had colic. You did what? David's face was red, but his jaw was set. It's for the best, Mom. They have nurses there, medical staff. If something happens to you here, we might not find you for days. And what about my house? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Rebecca and Michael exchanged another look. We'll take care of everything, Rebecca said. The house needs a lot of work anyway. We'll probably have to sell it to pay for your care. The room started spinning. Sell it. They were going to sell the house Patrick and I had poured our hearts into. The house where I had brought each of them home from the hospital. The house where Patrick had proposed to me on the front porch swing. The house where I had planned to live until my last breath. You can't do this, I said, my voice cracking. Actually, we can, Rebecca said, her tone suddenly cold and businesslike. We've already spoken to a lawyer. Given your recent incidents, we can petition for guardianship. It would be easier if you just agreed to go voluntarily. I stared at my daughter, this woman I had carried for 9 months and raised for 18 years, and I didn't recognize her. Incidents? What incidents? The nightgown thing. Forgetting Thanksgiving, Mrs. Peterson said you accused her grandson of stealing your mail. Because he was. He was delivering newspapers, Mom. I felt the walls closing in around me. My own children, the people I had sacrificed everything for, were standing in my living room treating me like I was already dead. Like I was a problem to be solved rather than their mother who had loved them unconditionally their entire lives. I need some air, I said, walking toward the kitchen. Mom, we're not done talking, Rebecca called after me. Yes, we are, I replied without turning around. I stood at my kitchen sink, gripping the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles went white. Through the window, I could see the garden Patrick and I had planted together, the apple tree we had celebrated our 10th anniversary under, the small shed where he had taught each of the children how to use tools. They wanted to sell all of it. They wanted to erase 47 years of my life and stick me in a room that smelled like disinfectant and defeat. Behind me, I could hear them whispering, their voices urgent and conspiratorial, planning my future without me, just like they had been doing behind my back for who knows how long. I walked back into the living room where they had spread the nursing home brochures across my coffee table, like they were planning a vacation. Sunny Meadows really is lovely, Rebecca was saying to Michael. And it's only 20 minutes from my house, so I can visit regularly. Visit regularly, I repeated, and they all looked up at me. How generous of you. Mom, don't be like that, David said. We're doing this because we love you. No, I said, my voice steady now, cold as winter rain. You're doing this because I'm inconvenient. Because worrying about me interferes with your busy lives. Because it's easier to park me somewhere than to actually take care of me. That's not fair, Michael protested. Isn't it? I asked.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
When was the last time any of you called me just to talk? When was the last time you visited without needing something? When was the last time you asked me what I wanted instead of deciding what was best for me? The silence that followed was answer enough. Rebecca stood up, smoothing her skirt with sharp, angry movements. Fine. If you want to be stubborn about this, we'll do it the hard way. We'll file the paperwork tomorrow. The hard way? I asked. Competency hearing, she said. We'll let a judge decide whether you're capable of making your own decisions. The words hit me like ice water. A competency hearing. They were going to try to have me declared mentally incompetent. My own children were going to stand in front of a judge and argue that their mother was too senile to live her own life. Get out, I said quietly. Mom, David started. Get out! I screamed, louder than I had raised my voice in years. All of you, get out of my house! Rebecca grabbed her purse and the folder of brochures. We'll be back tomorrow with the social worker, she said. You can either come quietly, or we'll have you removed. Your choice. They filed out of my house like soldiers following orders, leaving me standing alone in my living room surrounded by the ghosts of better times. I heard their car doors slam, heard their engines start, heard them drive away from the house where I had kissed their scraped knees and sung them lullabies and believed that love was enough to keep a family together. I sank into Patrick's chair and stared at the wedding portrait above the fireplace. What would you do, honey? I whispered to his smiling face. What would you do if they tried to take everything away from us? But Patrick wasn't there to answer, and for the first time since his funeral, I felt truly alone. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the same clock that had chimed every hour of my married life. I sat there as the afternoon light faded into evening, as the bread I had been baking burned in the oven, as the reality of my situation settled over me like a shroud. My children wanted to put me away. They wanted to sell my house, spend my money, and visit me on Sundays like I was some distant relative they barely remembered. They had already made the decision. They had already put down deposits and spoken to lawyers, and planned my exile from the only life I had ever known. But there was something they didn't know. Something I had done 3 months ago when I first overheard Rebecca on the phone with Michael, talking about what to do about Mom, like I was a burden they needed to figure out how to carry. I had gone to see my own lawyer. Margaret Chen had been handling my legal affairs since Patrick died, a sharp woman in her 50s who had never once talked down to me or treated me like I was losing my mind. When I told her about the conversations I had been overhearing, about the way my children were discussing my future without including me, she had listened without judgment. What do you want to do, Connie? She had asked. I want to make sure they can't take everything away from me, I had replied. And so we had drawn up new papers. A new will. A living trust. Power of attorney documents that gave Margaret control over my affairs, if I ever became truly incapacitated, not my children who saw me as a problem to be solved. But more than that, we had done something else. Something that would teach them exactly what it felt like to have their future decided without their input. I smiled for the first time since they had left. Tomorrow, when they came back with their social worker and their court papers, and their smug certainty that they held all the cards, they were going to learn something important about their mother. I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. I got up from Patrick's chair and walked to the kitchen, where I turned off the oven and threw away the burned bread. Then I picked up the phone and dialed Margaret's number. It's time, I said when she answered. Are you sure? She asked. I looked around my kitchen, at the ceramic roosters I had collected over 40 years of marriage, at the handprint art my grandchildren had made in school, at the calendar on the refrigerator, where I still marked Patrick's birthday every year even though he was gone. I'm sure, I said. I'll make the calls tonight, Margaret replied. By tomorrow afternoon, everything will be in motion. When I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Power. Control. The satisfaction of knowing that I was about to turn the tables on people who thought they could manipulate me because I was old. They wanted to treat me like I was already dead. Fine, they could see what it really felt like to lose everything. I spent the evening going through photo albums, touching the faces of my children when they were young and innocent and still looked at me like I hung the moon. Rebecca at 5. Gap-toothed and grinning in her Easter dress. Michael at 8, covered in mud from head to toe after building a fort in the backyard. David at 12, so proud of the birdhouse he had made in shop class. Where had those children gone? When had they stopped seeing me as their mother and started seeing me as an obligation? I closed the album and walked upstairs to my bedroom, the same room I had shared with Patrick for 37 years. His side of the bed was still empty, his pillow still carried the faint scent of his cologne, even after all this time. I had never been able to bring myself to change anything about this room. It was like a shrine to the life we had built together. Tomorrow, my children would learn that some shrines are worth protecting. I lay down on my side of the bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling around me. The creak of the floorboards, the whisper of wind through the eaves, the distant hum of the refrigerator downstairs. These were the sounds of home, the soundtrack of a life well lived. But they wouldn't be my sounds much longer if Rebecca had her way. I would be lying in a narrow bed in a sterile room, listening to the beeping of machines and the shuffling of nurses' feet in the hallway. I would be eating food prepared by strangers, following schedules set by people who didn't know that I liked my coffee black or that I always read for exactly 1 hour before bed. I rolled over and pressed my face into Patrick's pillow, breathing in the last traces of the man who had promised to love me in sickness and in health, till death do us part. He had kept that promise. He had held my hand through morning sickness, and midnight feedings, and teenage rebellions, and empty nest syndrome. He had been my partner in every decision, my companion in every joy and sorrow. If he were here now, none of this would be happening. Patrick would never have let them talk to me the way Rebecca had talked to me today. He would have stood up for me, defended me, reminded them that I was their mother and deserved their respect, if nothing else. But Patrick was gone, and I was on my own. Or so my children thought. I smiled into the darkness, imagining their faces when they discovered what I had really been doing during those doctor's appointments I had been going to so frequently. Let them think I was falling apart. Let them believe their own narrative about my declining mental state. Tomorrow, they would learn the difference between being old and being defeated. And they would discover that underestimating Connie Murphy was the biggest mistake they had ever made. The next morning dawned gray and cold, the kind of October day that made you want to stay in bed with a cup of tea and a good book. But I was up before sunrise, moving through my morning routine with the precision of someone who had been getting ready for battle. I showered and dressed carefully, choosing my navy blue dress, the one Patrick had always said made my eyes look like sapphires. I applied my makeup with steady hands, fixed my silver hair in the style I had worn for 20 years, and pinned on the pearl brooch Patrick had given me for our 25th anniversary. If I was going to war with my own children, I was going to look like the formidable woman I had always been. By 8 o'clock, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the morning newspaper, waiting. Margaret had said she would make her calls before 9, and I trusted her to keep her word. Everything was in place. All the dominoes were lined up, ready to fall. At exactly 9:15, my phone rang. Mrs. Murphy? The voice was unfamiliar, professional, slightly nervous. This is she. This is Janet Williams from Harborview Financial. I'm calling about your accounts with us. Yes? Ma'am, we've received some unusual instructions regarding your savings and checking accounts. I just wanted to confirm that you authorized these transactions. I smiled, even though she couldn't see me. I authorized everything, dear. Is there a problem? No problem, ma'am. It's just, well, it's quite a substantial amount of money to be moving around. I wanted to make sure you understood the implications. I understand perfectly, I said. How long will the transfers take? They should be completed by noon today. But, Mrs. Murphy, are you sure about this? Once the money is moved, it will be very difficult to reverse the process. I'm absolutely certain, I replied. Thank you for calling to confirm. I hung up the phone and took another sip of my coffee. Phase 1 was in motion. At 10:30, the phone rang again. Connie, it's Margaret. Everything's filed with the court. The restraining order should be in effect within the hour. And the other thing? Done. The deed transfer was recorded this morning. Congratulations. You no longer own your house. I felt a moment of vertigo at those words, even though I had known they were coming. After 47 years, the house on Maple Street was no longer mine. But it wasn't my children's either, which was the whole point. How long before they find out? I asked. Depends on how quickly they move on their threats. If necessary, yes. I stood up and walked to the mantelpiece, running my fingers along the edge of Patrick's photograph. And who makes that decision? Who decides what's necessary? James Bradford spoke for the first time, his voice smooth and professional. Mrs. Murphy, if you're declared incompetent to handle your own affairs, your family would be appointed as your guardians. They would make those decisions in your best interest. My best interest, I said, turning to face them. How thoughtful of them. Rebecca's face was flushed now, her patience clearly running thin. Mom, stop being sarcastic. This is serious. We're trying to help you. Are you? I asked. Or are you trying to help yourselves? That's not fair. Isn't it? Tell me, Rebecca, when did you put down that deposit at Sunny Meadows? Before or after you decided I was incompetent? She had the grace to look uncomfortable. Mom, we had to be prepared. We had to have options ready. Options for me, or options for you? Helen Morrison cleared her throat. Mrs. Murphy, I can see you're upset, but fighting this process won't help anyone. Why don't we visit one of the facilities your family has selected? I think you'd be surprised at how nice they are. I walked back to my chair and sat down, folding my hands in my lap. That's very kind of you, Helen, but I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. What kind of misunderstanding? James Bradford asked. I looked at each of them in turn, these people who had come to my house to dismantle my life. You see, you're all operating under the assumption that I'm a helpless old woman who doesn't understand what's happening to her. You think I'm confused, incompetent, unable to make my own decisions? Mom, Rebecca started, but I held up my hand. You also assume that I own this house, that I have assets you can liquidate, that I have property you can sell to pay for the warehouse where you want to store me until I die. The room was very quiet now. Helen Morrison had stopped taking notes. James Bradford was leaning forward, his professional composure slipping slightly. What are you saying? Rebecca asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I smiled, the same smile I had given her when she was 5 years old and thought she had hidden the evidence of her crayon artwork on my bedroom wall. I'm saying, dear daughter, that you have greatly underestimated your mother. The silence in my living room stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Rebecca's face had gone pale, her perfectly applied makeup unable to hide the confusion creeping across her features. James Bradford adjusted his tie nervously, while Helen Morrison clutched her clipboard like it might provide answers to questions she hadn't thought to ask. What do you mean we've underestimated you? Rebecca's voice was thin, uncertain for the first time since she'd walked into my house with her folder of nursing home brochures. I reached into the drawer of the side table next to my chair, the same drawer where I had kept Patrick's reading glasses and the TV remote he could never find. My fingers closed around the manila envelope I had placed there that morning, thick with documents that would change everything. I mean, sweetheart, that while you were busy planning my future behind my back, I was making some plans of my own. I pulled out the envelope and set it on my lap, not opening it yet, just letting them see it. The weight of those papers felt like justice in my hands. Helen Morrison leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Murphy, what kind of plans? Well, I said, smoothing my dress over my knees. Let me start with the most obvious one. You came here today assuming that I own this house, that it's part of my estate, that it could be sold to pay for my incarceration in one of your lovely facilities. James Bradford's professional mask was slipping now. Are you saying you don't own this property? That's exactly what I'm saying. I opened the envelope and pulled out the first set of documents. As of 9 o'clock this morning, this house belongs to the Maple Street Community Trust, a charitable organization established for the purpose of preserving historic homes. Rebecca shot to her feet. That's impossible. You can't just give away the house. Can't I? I looked up at her, this woman who had once been my little girl, who used to climb into my lap when she had nightmares. Actually, dear, I can do whatever I want with my own property. Or rather, what used to be my property. Helen Morrison was scribbling frantically on her clipboard now. When did this transfer take place? 3 months ago, I replied calmly. Though it wasn't recorded until this morning. I wanted to make sure all my other arrangements were in place first. Other arrangements? James Bradford's voice was sharp now, all pretense of professional courtesy abandoned. I pulled out another set of papers. Oh yes, there were quite a few arrangements to make. For instance, my savings account at Harborview Financial. The one Rebecca was counting on to pay for my care. My daughter's face was white now. Mom, what did you do? I donated it, I said simply. Every penny. To the Alzheimer's Association, the American Cancer Society, and the local animal shelter. Amazing how quickly electronic transfers can be processed these days. The room erupted. Rebecca was shouting something about lawyers and mental competency. James Bradford was demanding to see the paperwork. Helen Morrison was asking if I understood what I had done. But their voices seemed to fade into background noise as I sat there, calm and centered for the first time in months. Mrs. Murphy, Helen Morrison said, raising her voice above the chaos. Do you understand that these actions could be seen as signs of diminished mental capacity? Giving away your life savings, transferring property without consulting family members. Could they? I asked mildly. Or could they be seen as the actions of a woman who finally realized her family viewed her as nothing more than a bank account with a pulse? That's not true. Rebecca was crying now, mascara streaking down her cheeks. We love you, Mom. We're trying to protect you. Protect me from what? From living in my own home? From making my own decisions? From having any dignity in my old age? My voice was rising now, years of suppressed anger finally breaking free. You came into my house yesterday and told me I was going into a nursing home whether I liked it or not. You talked about selling everything Patrick and I built together like it was just stuff to be liquidated. You treated me like I was already dead. We were worried about you. Michael's voice came from the doorway. I hadn't heard him come in, but there he was, his work clothes dirty, his face flushed with anger. Mom, you've been acting strange for months. Forgetting things, getting confused, wearing your nightgown outside. Strange? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Michael, I've been grieving. I've been lonely. I've been watching my children treat me like a burden they can't wait to be rid of. If that's made me act strange, then maybe the problem isn't my mental state. David appeared behind Michael, still looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. Grandma, we never said we wanted to be rid of you. Didn't you? I turned to look at him. This boy I had raised after his parents' divorce, who had lived in this house for 2 years when he was in high school. When was the last time you called me just to say hello, David? When was the last time any of you visited without needing something? The silence that followed was answer enough. Helen Morrison cleared her throat. Mrs. Murphy, regardless of the family dynamics here, I still need to complete my assessment. These financial transactions you've described are concerning. Are they? Let me show you something else that might concern you. I pulled out another document from my envelope. This is a letter from Dr. Patricia Williams, my physician for the past 8 years. She conducted a complete cognitive assessment on me last week. I handed the letter to Helen Morrison, who read it with growing confusion. This says you're mentally competent, fully capable of making your own decisions. It does indeed. Dr. Williams was quite thorough. Memory tests, cognitive assessments, psychological evaluation. I passed everything with flying colors. I looked at Rebecca, whose tears had stopped flowing as the implications sank in. Turns out there's nothing wrong with my mind except that I finally started using it to protect myself. James Bradford snatched the letter from Helen Morrison's hand, scanning it quickly. This doesn't change anything. Mental competency can fluctuate. We can still petition the court. You could try, I agreed. But you might find that difficult. Why? Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. I pulled out the final set of documents from my envelope, because I've already petitioned the court myself, for a protective order against all 3 of my children. The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on my hardwood floors. What? Michael stepped forward, his face dark with anger. Mom, you can't be serious. Oh, I'm very serious. Yesterday, you threatened to have me declared incompetent and forcibly removed from my home. That constitutes elder abuse, and I have every right to protect myself from it. Helen Morrison was flipping through pages now, her professional composure completely shattered. Mrs. Murphy, this is unprecedented. I've never seen a case where what? Where an elderly person fought back against their own family? Where someone refused to be a victim? I stood up, my back straight, my voice steady. I spent 3 months planning this, Helen. 3 months documenting every conversation, every threat, every attempt to manipulate me into giving up my independence. I walked to the mantelpiece and picked up a small digital recorder I had placed there that morning, including yesterday's conversation and today's little intervention. Rebecca's face went ashen. You've been recording us? Every word. Amazing what you can learn about people when they think you're too senile to fight back. I pressed the play button, and Rebecca's voice filled the room, cold and calculating. We'll file the paperwork tomorrow. Competency hearing. We'll let a judge decide whether you're capable of making your own decisions. I turned off the recorder and looked at my daughter, this woman I had given birth to, nursed through childhood illness, supported through her divorce, helped with her mortgage payments when her ex-husband stopped paying child support. Tell me, Rebecca, does that sound like love to you? Does that sound like concern for my well-being? Or does it sound like 3 people planning to steal everything their mother owns? It wasn't like that, she whispered. Wasn't it? Then explain to me why you put down a deposit at Sunny Meadows before you ever talked to me about moving. Explain why you contacted a lawyer before you expressed any concerns about my mental state. Explain why your first thought wasn't to help me stay in my home, but to get me out of it as quickly as possible. James Bradford was gathering his papers, his professional confidence completely evaporated. Mrs. Murphy, I think there's been a misunderstanding here. My clients were genuinely concerned about your welfare. Were they? Then why didn't they offer to help me with housework? Why didn't they suggest a visiting nurse or a cleaning service? Why didn't they ask what I needed instead of deciding what was convenient for them? I walked back to my chair and sat down, suddenly feeling every one of my 73 years. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with heartbreak. I raised 3 children, I said quietly. I worked 2 jobs to put food on this table and clothes on their backs. I sacrificed vacations and new clothes and dinners out so they could have everything they needed. I sat up all night when they were sick, drove them to every practice and game and school event, helped them with homework. I barely understood myself. My voice broke slightly, but I pressed on. I loved them unconditionally. I would have done anything for them. And I truly believed, that when I needed them, they would be there for me the same way I was always there for them. Rebecca was crying again, but quietly now, tears streaming down her face without sound. Instead, they saw me as a problem to be solved, an inconvenience to be managed, a bank account to be emptied, and a house to be sold. I looked at each of them in turn. So I solved the problem for them. I managed the inconvenience. I emptied the bank account and gave away the house. Mom, David said, his voice thick with emotion. We never meant... What? You never meant for me to find out? You never meant for me to fight back? You never meant for there to be consequences? I shook my head. I'm sure you didn't. I'm sure you thought your old, confused mother would just go quietly into whatever facility you chose for her. Helen Morrison stood up, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding in front of her. Mrs. Murphy, I think I have enough information for my report. Given the documentation you've provided and your physician's assessment, I can't recommend involuntary placement. Thank you, Helen. I appreciate your professionalism. She gathered her things and headed for the door, pausing only to say, I hope you can work things out with your family. James Bradford was right behind her, muttering something about consulting with his law firm about the situation. Neither of them looked back as they left my house, leaving me alone with my 3 children. The children I had just systematically destroyed. Michael was the first to speak. Mom, you've made your point. You're angry. You feel betrayed. I get it. But what you've done today, you've given away everything. Your security, your future, everything Dad worked for. Have I? Or have I given away your security, your future, your inheritance? I looked at him steadily. Because, let's be honest, Michael, this was never about my well-being. This was about 3 middle-aged people who were counting on Mommy's money to solve their own financial problems. That's not true, isn't it? Rebecca, when was the last time you made a mortgage payment without asking me for help? Michael, how many times have I bailed you out when your construction business was slow? David, who paid for your car repairs last month? The silence that followed was deafening. I gave and gave and gave, I continued, and you took and took and took. And then, when I needed support, when I needed compassion, when I needed someone to care about what I wanted, you decided I was too much trouble. So you made plans to warehouse me somewhere convenient while you divided up my assets. Rebecca collapsed back into Patrick's chair, her designer purse forgotten on the floor. What are we supposed to do now? How are we supposed to take care of you if you have nothing left? You're not, I said simply. You're not supposed to take care of me at all. You made it very clear yesterday that you don't want that responsibility. So I've relieved you of it. But where will you live? David asked. If you don't own the house anymore. I have a lifetime lease, I replied. The Maple Street Community Trust was very generous in that regard. I can live here until I die, as long as I maintain the property and allow occasional historical tours. And when you need medical care? When you can't live alone anymore? I'll cross that bridge when I come to it, without your help. The words hung in the air like a curse. Michael ran his hands through his hair, looking older than his 45 years. David stared at the floor like he was trying to disappear into it. Rebecca just cried, silent tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. Mom, she whispered finally. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. We handled this all wrong. Yes, you did. Can you forgive us? Can we try to fix this? I looked at my daughter, at the pain in her eyes, at the genuine remorse that was too little and too late. Part of me, the mother part that had loved her since before she was born, wanted to say yes. Wanted to gather her in my arms and tell her everything would be okay, the way I had when she was small and the world seemed too big and scary. But the woman part of me, the part that had been betrayed and humiliated and treated like garbage by her own children, couldn't find those words. I don't know, I said honestly. I truly don't know. What can we do? There has to be something we can do. You can leave, I said quietly. You can go home, to your families, and your busy lives, and think about what you've lost today. Not money, not a house, not an inheritance. You've lost your mother's trust. You've lost her respect. And I'm not sure those are things you can ever get back. They left slowly, reluctantly, like mourners leaving a funeral. Rebecca paused at the door, looking back at me sitting alone in my living room. I love you, Mom, she said. I know you do, I replied. But sometimes love isn't enough. After they were gone, I sat in the gathering dusk, surrounded by the ghosts of 47 years of memories. The house felt different now, like it knew it didn't belong to me anymore. The walls that had witnessed birthday parties and Christmas mornings and graduation celebrations now belonged to strangers who cared about historical preservation more than the family that had lived within them. I had won the battle. I had protected myself from being warehoused against my will. I had shown my children that their mother wasn't the helpless victim they thought she was. But victory tasted like ashes in my mouth. The phone rang, cutting through the silence. I almost didn't answer it, but old habits die hard. Mrs. Murphy, this is Margaret Chen. Hello, Margaret. I wanted to check on you. How did it go today? Exactly as we planned. They're gone. The social worker is gone, and I think we've made our point. And how do you feel? I closed my eyes, suddenly exhausted, like I've just burned down my own life to keep someone else from stealing it. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Do you regret it? I thought about that question for a long time. Did I regret protecting myself? Did I regret refusing to be victimized? Did I regret showing my children that actions have consequences? No, I said finally. I don't regret it. But I don't feel good about it either. That's understandable. You've been through a trauma, Connie. Being betrayed by your own children is one of the worst things that can happen to a person. What happens now? Now you heal. You figure out what you want the rest of your life to look like. You decide whether there's room in it for people who hurt you this badly. After Margaret hung up, I walked through my house, turning on lights, chasing away the shadows that seemed to gather in every corner. In the kitchen, I opened the refrigerator and stared at its contents without seeing them. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't sure I would ever be hungry again. I thought about calling Linda, my friend from church, who had been asking me to join her for dinner for weeks. But I wasn't ready to explain what had happened today. I wasn't ready to admit that I had just cut my own children out of my life to protect myself from their greed. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had fed my children breakfast every morning for 18 years. The same table where Patrick and I had played cards and planned vacations and dreamed about the future we thought we would have together. The future we thought would include children who loved us enough to take care of us when we were old. I sipped my tea and listened to the sounds of the house settling around me. Tomorrow, I would have to figure out how to live with what I had done. I would have to decide whether I was a victim who had fought back or a mother who had destroyed her own family. Tonight, I was just a 73-year-old woman sitting alone in a house that no longer belonged to her, wondering if the price of dignity was worth the cost of love. Outside my kitchen window, the street lamps flickered on one by one, casting pools of yellow light on the sidewalk where my children had once ridden their bicycles and played hopscotch and believed that home was the safest place in the world. Now they knew better. Now they knew that even home wasn't safe when the people who were supposed to love you decided you were worth more dead than alive. I finished my tea and washed the cup, a ritual as automatic as breathing. Then I turned off the lights and walked upstairs to my bedroom, to the bed I had shared with Patrick for 37 years. To the room where I had once believed that love could conquer anything. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new pain, new questions about whether I had done the right thing. But tonight I was still Connie Murphy, and I was still standing in my own house, and no one could take that away from me. Even if that house belonged to someone else now. Even if standing alone was the loneliest thing I had ever done. 3 days passed in a strange kind of silence. No phone calls from my children, no surprise visits, no angry voicemails demanding explanations or begging for forgiveness. It was as if they had simply vanished from my life, leaving behind only the echo of harsh words and broken promises. I tried to maintain my normal routine, morning coffee at the kitchen table with the newspaper spread before me, tending to my small garden where the last of the autumn flowers still bloomed defiantly against the coming winter. Afternoon tea while reading mystery novels from the library. But everything felt hollow, like I was playing the part of Connie Murphy while the real me watched from somewhere far away. On Thursday morning, I was deadheading the chrysanthemums when Mrs. Henderson from next door appeared at the fence that separated our yards. Eleanor Henderson was 81 years old and sharp as a tack, the kind of neighbor who noticed everything and forgot nothing. "Morning, Connie," she called out, her gray hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "Yes, it is," I replied, straightening up and brushing dirt from my gardening gloves. Eleanor moved closer to the fence, her eyes bright with curiosity. "I couldn't help but notice all the commotion at your house the other day. Official-looking people with briefcases. Everything all right?" I had been dreading this conversation. Eleanor had been my neighbor for 23 years, ever since she and her late husband Harold had moved in next door. She knew my children, had watched them grow up, had attended their graduation parties and wedding receptions. She would find out eventually what had happened. "Family matters," I said carefully. "Ah," Eleanor nodded knowingly. "The kind that require lawyers and social workers?" There was no point in pretending. Eleanor had probably been watching from her kitchen window, taking mental notes like she always did. Something like that. She studied my face with the intensity of someone who had raised 5 children and buried 2 husbands. "You want to talk about it?" I looked at this woman who had been nothing but kind to me for over 2 decades, who had brought me casseroles after Patrick's funeral and checked on me during ice storms, and never once made me feel like a burden. Maybe it was time to tell someone the truth. "Come around to the back porch," I said. "I'll put the kettle on." 20 minutes later, we were sitting on my screened porch with steaming mugs of chamomile tea, watching the morning sun filter through the maple trees. I told Eleanor everything. The children's plan to put me in a nursing home, the threats about competency hearings, the legal maneuvers I had executed to protect myself, the devastating confrontation that had ended with my own children walking out of my life. Eleanor listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of understanding. When I finished, she sat quietly for a long moment, staring out at the garden Patrick and I had planted together. "Well," she said finally, "I can't say I'm surprised." I looked at her in shock. "You can't? Connie, honey? I've been watching your children for months. The way they talked to you, the way they looked at this house like they were already measuring it for new furniture. I've seen it before with other families in the neighborhood. Adult children who start seeing their parents as problems instead of people. But surely what I did was extreme, giving away everything, cutting them off completely." Eleanor turned to face me, her faded blue eyes fierce with conviction. "What you did was survive. What you did was refuse to let them destroy you quietly." She reached over and patted my hand. "I'm proud of you." The words hit me like a physical blow. Proud of me. When was the last time anyone had said that to me? When was the last time I had felt worthy of pride instead of pity? "I feel terrible about it," I admitted. "They're my children, Eleanor. I love them." "Of course you do. And they love you too, in their own selfish way. But love without respect is just manipulation, and that's what they were doing to you. Manipulating you with guilt, and fear and family obligation." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching a cardinal build a nest in the oak tree at the edge of my property. Finally, Eleanor spoke again. "What will you do now?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "I suppose I'll just keep living. One day at a time. That's all any of us can do." Eleanor finished her tea and stood up. "But Connie, remember this. You didn't lose your family. You discovered who they really were. And that's painful, but it's also a gift. Now you can decide what kind of life you want to live with people who actually deserve your love." After Eleanor left, I sat on the porch for another hour, thinking about her words. You discovered who they really were. It was a harsh truth, but truth nonetheless. My children had shown me exactly how much my happiness and dignity mattered to them when weighed against their own convenience and financial gain. The phone rang, interrupting my brooding. I almost didn't answer it, but something made me get up and walk to the kitchen. "Hello? Mrs. Murphy? This is Sarah Chen from the Tribune. I'm Margaret Chen's niece. She gave me your number and said you might be willing to speak with me about your situation." My blood ran cold. My situation? The legal case involving elder abuse and financial exploitation. It's become quite a story in legal circles. A senior citizen successfully protecting herself from her own family members, who were trying to steal her assets and institutionalize her against her will. I gripped the phone tighter. "I don't want to talk to any reporters. I understand your reluctance, Mrs. Murphy, but this story could help other elderly people who are facing similar situations. Your case is already being discussed in law schools as an example of proactive legal planning for seniors." "What do you mean it's being discussed?" "The court filings are public record. The restraining order against your children, the property transfer to avoid exploitation, the medical documentation proving your mental competency. It's all there for anyone to see." My legs suddenly felt weak. I sank into a kitchen chair, my mind reeling. Public record. Anyone could see what had happened. Anyone could read about how my own children had tried to steal everything I owned. "Mrs. Murphy? Are you still there?" "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, I'm here. Would you be willing to meet with me? Just to tell your side of the story? I think it's important for people to know that elderly people don't have to be victims." I closed my eyes, trying to process what this meant. My private family drama was becoming a public story. Strangers were reading court documents that detailed the most painful betrayal of my life. "I need to think about this," I said. "Of course. Here's my number. Please call me if you change your mind." After I hung up, I walked to my living room window and stared out at the street where I had lived for 47 years. The same street where my children had learned to ride bikes and played with neighborhood friends and sold lemonade from a card table on hot summer days. The same street where neighbors had become friends and friends had become family. Now those same neighbors would read about my family's destruction in the newspaper. They would know that Rebecca and Michael and David had tried to steal from their own mother. They would whisper about it at the grocery store and the post office and the coffee shop downtown. The phone rang again. This time I let it go to the answering machine. "Mom, it's Rebecca. Please pick up. We need to talk. People are starting to ask questions about what happened, and I don't know what to tell them. Please call me back." I stood frozen, listening to my daughter's voice crack with desperation. People were asking questions. Of course they were. In a town like ours, news traveled faster than wildfire. The machine beeped, and immediately the phone rang again. "Connie, it's Linda from church. I just heard the most awful rumor about Rebecca and the boys. Please call me when you get this. I know it can't be true." Another beep. Another ring. "Mrs. Murphy, this is Tom Bradley from Channel 7 News. We'd like to interview you about your groundbreaking legal case. Could you call us back at your earliest convenience?" The calls kept coming. Reporters, neighbors, friends, distant relatives, who hadn't spoken to me in years but suddenly wanted to know if the stories they were hearing were true. I turned off the ringer and unplugged the answering machine, but I could still see the red light blinking faster and faster as the messages piled up. By evening, there were cars parked outside my house. I peeked through the curtains and saw people with cameras and notebooks, waiting for me to come outside. A van with a satellite dish had parked across the street. My quiet residential neighborhood had become a media circus. I made myself a simple dinner of soup and crackers, but I could barely eat. Every few minutes, someone knocked on my door. Reporters calling my name, asking for just a few minutes of my time, promising to tell my story fairly and accurately. I ignored them all. Around 9 o'clock, my doorbell rang. I assumed it was another reporter, but when I looked through the peephole, I saw Margaret Chen standing on my porch with a bag of groceries in her arms. "It's Margaret," she called out. "I brought provisions." I opened the door quickly, pulling her inside before the cameras could catch us. "What's happening out there?" "Media frenzy," she said, setting the groceries on my kitchen counter. "Your story hit the legal journals this morning, and it's been picked up by news outlets across the country. Elderly woman outsmarts greedy children. David versus Goliath. Senior citizen fights back against elder abuse. They're calling you a hero." "A hero?" I stared at her in disbelief. "I destroyed my own family." "You protected yourself from people who were trying to destroy you," Margaret corrected. "There's a difference." She unpacked the groceries while I watched in stunned silence. Bread, milk, cheese, soup, tea, chocolate. Comfort food for a woman under siege. "How long will this last?" I asked. "Hard to say. Depends on whether you decide to give interviews or if something bigger comes along to distract them. But Connie, this is an important story. Do you realize how many elderly people are being financially exploited by their own families? How many are being forced into nursing homes against their will? Your case could change how these situations are handled. I don't want to be a symbol. I just wanted to protect myself." Margaret studied my face with the same intense focus she used when reviewing legal documents. "What are you afraid of?" The question caught me off guard. What was I afraid of? That people would judge me for turning against my own children? That they would think I was a bitter old woman who had gone too far? That they would see me as a victim instead of a survivor? "I'm afraid that this will make everything permanent," I said finally. As long as this was just between me and my children, there was still a chance we could work things out. But now that it's public, now that everyone knows what they tried to do, there's no going back, Margaret finished. Exactly. Margaret poured herself a glass of water and leaned against my kitchen counter. "Can I ask you something? Do you really want to go back? Do you really want to pretend this never happened and trust them with your future again?" I opened my mouth to say yes. Of course I did. They were my children, and I loved them. But the words wouldn't come. Because the truth was, I didn't trust them anymore. The truth was, I would never feel safe with them again. The truth was, they had shown me who they really were, and I couldn't unsee it. No, I whispered. I don't. Then maybe this publicity is a blessing in disguise. Maybe it's the thing that makes it impossible for you to backslide into the same toxic patterns that got you into this mess in the first place. A loud knock on my door interrupted our conversation. Then, another. Then someone calling my name through the mail slot. Mrs. Murphy, this is Jessica Martinez from Good Morning America. We'd love to tell your story to a national audience. I looked at Margaret with wide eyes. Good Morning America? Your story is resonating with people, Connie. Older Americans who are afraid of their own children, adult children who are struggling with aging parents, anyone who's ever felt powerless in a family dynamic. You've given them hope. I've given them a cautionary tale about what happens when families fall apart. You've given them proof that it's possible to fight back. That being old doesn't mean being helpless. That dignity is worth fighting for, even when the fight breaks your heart. Another knock. Another reporter calling my name. The phone in the kitchen started ringing again. The sound muffled but insistent. I can't handle this, I said, suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what my private pain had become. I just wanted them to leave me alone. I just wanted to live in my own house and make my own decisions. I never wanted to be famous. Fame is temporary, Margaret said gently, but the precedent you've set, the legal protections you've put in place, the example you've shown other elderly people, that's gonna last. The knocking continued. The phone kept ringing. Outside my kitchen window, I could see the glow of camera lights illuminating my backyard. My sanctuary had become a fishbowl, my private grief transformed into public entertainment. What do I do? I asked. You have choices, Margaret replied. You can hide in here until they get bored and move on to the next story. You can give one big interview and then refuse all others. You can embrace this platform and use it to help other people in similar situations. Or you can leave town for a while until the attention dies down. Leave town. The idea had never occurred to me, but suddenly it seemed like the only viable option. I had lived on Maple Street for 47 years. But what was keeping me here now? The house wasn't mine anymore, my children weren't speaking to me. My life had already been turned upside down. Maybe it was time to turn it upside down again, but on my own terms this time. Where would I go? I asked. Anywhere you want. You're free now, Connie. For the first time in decades, you're completely free. Free. The word felt foreign in my mouth, like a language I had forgotten how to speak. I had been someone's daughter, then someone's wife, then someone's mother, for 73 years. I had always defined myself in relation to other people's needs and expectations. I had never been just Connie, standing alone in the world with no one to answer to but herself. The knocking on my door had stopped, but I could still see reporters milling around on my front lawn, waiting for me to emerge, to give them the story they needed to fill their broadcasts and newspapers, waiting for me to explain how a family could destroy itself so completely. I need to think, I said. Of course, but while you're thinking, remember this. You survived something that destroys most people. You're stronger than you know, and you have options you haven't even considered yet. After Margaret left through the back door to avoid the reporters, I sat in my darkened living room thinking about freedom, about choices, about the possibility of starting over at 73 years old. Outside, the media circus continued. Car doors slamming, voices calling my name, the occasional flash of a camera trying to capture something through my windows. They wanted my story, but they only wanted the dramatic parts. The betrayal, the revenge, the family destroyed by greed and pride. They didn't want to know about the quiet moments. The way I still reached for Patrick's hand in the morning before remembering he was gone. The way I still cooked for 4 people instead of 1, because muscle memory dies hard. The way I still listened for my children's voices in every car that passed, hoping they had come to apologize. They wanted a hero or a villain, not a broken-hearted mother who had chosen survival over surrender. The phone rang one more time before I went to bed. I had plugged it back in, thinking it might be Margaret or Eleanor or someone else who actually cared about me rather than my story. It was David. "Grandma," he said, and his voice was small and young like it used to be when he was little and afraid of the dark. "I'm so sorry. I know you probably don't want to talk to me, but I had to call. I had to tell you that I never wanted any of this to happen." I closed my eyes, my heart breaking all over again at the sound of his voice. "David! The reporters have been calling me all day. They want to know what it's like to be cut off by your own grandmother. They want me to defend what we did or condemn you for fighting back. I don't know what to tell them." "Tell them the truth." "What is the truth?" "That we were scared you were getting confused and we didn't know how to help you? That we made decisions without asking what you wanted because we thought we knew better? That we treated you like a child instead of respecting you as our mother?" Hearing him say it, hearing him acknowledge what they had done, was almost worse than when he had been in denial about it. Because now I knew that he understood exactly how much they had hurt me. "All of that is true," I said softly. "I keep thinking about when I lived with you in high school. How you never made me feel like a burden, even though I know I was. How you came to every basketball game and cheered louder than anyone else in the gym. How you helped me with my college applications and drove me to visit campuses and cried when I graduated. My throat was tight with unshed tears. I remember. You were the best grandmother I could have asked for, and I repaid you by trying to take away everything you cared about." His voice broke. "How do I live with that?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "I don't know how any of us live with what's happened. Is there any way to fix this? Any way to earn your forgiveness?" I looked around my living room, at the family photos I hadn't had the heart to take down yet, at the empty spaces where Patrick's presence used to fill every corner, at the life I had built and lost, and built again, only to lose it all over again. "I don't know that either," I said. "I wish I did, but I don't." We talked for another 20 minutes, both of us crying, both of us trying to find a way back to each other, across the wreckage of trust and love, and family bonds that seemed irreparably broken. When we finally hung up, I felt more exhausted than I had ever felt in my life. The reporters were still outside. The phone would start ringing again in the morning. The whole world wanted to know what it felt like to destroy your own family in the name of self-preservation. But tonight, in the darkness of my bedroom, I was just a grandmother who had lost her grandson twice. Once to his parents' greed and manipulation, and once to her own desperate need to protect herself from the people who were supposed to love her most. I fell asleep clutching Patrick's pillow, wishing he was there to tell me what to do next, wishing he could help me figure out how to be free when freedom felt so much like falling. I woke up the next morning to the sound of rain pattering against my bedroom windows and the distant hum of voices on my front lawn. The reporters were still there, huddled under umbrellas, waiting for me to emerge from my house like some kind of exotic animal they needed to photograph for their stories. I made coffee in the pre-dawn darkness, moving quietly through my kitchen as if the reporters might hear me and start pounding on my door again. The normalcy of the routine felt surreal after everything that had happened. Coffee still smelled the same. The morning paper still landed with a thud on my driveway, though I couldn't retrieve it without facing the media circus camped outside. My phone had been ringing since 5:30. I let it go to voicemail, not ready to face whatever new complications the day might bring. But around 7, I heard Margaret's voice coming through the speaker, urgent and concerned. "Connie, pick up if you're there. We have a problem." I grabbed the phone. "What kind of problem?" "Rebecca gave an interview to Channel 7 last night. It aired on the morning show. She's claiming you have dementia and that she's going to fight the property transfer in court." My blood turned to ice. "She what?" "She's saying you weren't mentally competent when you signed the papers, that I took advantage of an elderly woman with diminished capacity. She's demanding a full investigation into my legal practices." I sank into a kitchen chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. "Can she do that?" "She can try. But Connie, we have Dr. Williams' assessment, we have the recordings you made. We have documentation going back months. She doesn't have a case, but she can make a lot of noise and cause a lot of trouble. Through my kitchen window, I could see more vans arriving, more reporters setting up cameras on my lawn. My quiet street looked like a carnival, complete with neighbors standing on their porches gawking at the spectacle. There's more, Margaret continued. Michael and David held a press conference this morning. They're saying they're concerned about your mental health and asking for a court-ordered psychological evaluation. After everything I've been through, they're still trying to have me declared incompetent? It's a desperate move, but yes, they're claiming that giving away your life savings and transferring your house proves you're not thinking clearly. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. So when they tried to steal everything from me, that was them looking out for my best interests. But when I protected myself from their theft, that's proof I'm crazy? That's essentially their argument, yes. I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen, staring at the rain-soaked chaos outside my windows. My children weren't done with me yet. Even after I had shown them the consequences of their betrayal, even after they had lost everything they thought they were entitled to, they were still fighting to prove I was incompetent. The irony was breathtaking. They had pushed me to the breaking point with their greed and manipulation, and now they were using my defensive actions as evidence that I was mentally unfit. It was like punching someone and then claiming their bruises proved they were clumsy. The doorbell rang, followed by heavy knocking. A voice called through the door, official and authoritative. Mrs. Murphy, this is Officer Jenkins with the County Sheriff's Department. I have a court order here that requires your immediate attention. My heart started racing. A court order? They had actually done it. They had convinced a judge to order a psychological evaluation. I opened the door to find a young police officer standing on my porch, trying to shield a manila envelope from the rain while cameras flashed around him like lightning strikes. Mrs. Murphy? Yes. I need to serve you with this court order. You're required to appear before Judge Harrison on Monday morning for a competency hearing. I took the envelope with trembling hands. A competency hearing? Yes, ma'am. Your family has petitioned the court to have you evaluated by a court-appointed psychiatrist. The judge will determine whether you're mentally capable of making your own legal and financial decisions. The reporters were shouting questions, their voices blending into a cacophony of intrusion. Mrs. Murphy, how do you respond to your daughter's claims? Are you suffering from dementia? Do you regret giving away your inheritance? Officer Jenkins looked uncomfortable with the media attention. Ma'am, you might want to contact an attorney. This is a serious legal matter. After he left, I stood in my doorway holding the court papers, rain misting my face as cameras continued to flash. The reporters surged forward, microphones thrust in my direction, but I couldn't hear their questions over the roaring in my ears. This was really happening. After everything I had done to protect myself, my own children were still trying to have me declared mentally incompetent. They were willing to drag me through a public legal battle, to humiliate me in front of a judge and jury, to expose my most private struggles to a courtroom full of strangers. I closed the door and leaned against it, my whole body shaking. The court papers felt heavy in my hands, heavier than they should have been. I opened the envelope and read the legal language that essentially accused me of being too mentally compromised to manage my own life. My phone rang. Margaret again. I heard about the court order, she said. Are you okay? No, I said honestly. I'm not okay. I'm not okay at all. We can fight this, Connie. Dr. Williams will testify on your behalf. We have months of documentation proving your mental competency. We have recordings of your children threatening you. We have evidence that they were planning to steal from you. But I'll have to go to court. I'll have to sit in front of a judge while my own children argue that I'm senile and incompetent. I'll have to defend my right to make my own decisions. Yes, you will. But you'll win. I'm certain of it. Win. As if there could be any real victory in a situation like this. As if proving my sanity in a courtroom could somehow repair the damage that had been done to my family, to my heart, to my faith, and the people I had loved most in the world. I can't do this, I said. I can't sit in a courtroom and listen to Rebecca tell a judge that I'm losing my mind. I can't watch Michael and David nod along while strangers decide whether I'm competent enough to live my own life. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm done fighting. I'm done defending myself against people who should be defending me. I'm done trying to prove I'm worthy of basic human dignity. There was a long pause. Connie, if you don't fight this, if you don't appear in court, they could win by default. A judge could declare you incompetent without ever hearing your side of the story. Then let them have their victory. Let them prove to the world that they were right and I was wrong. You don't mean that, but I did mean it. I was exhausted by the fighting, drained by the constant need to justify my existence, my decisions, my right to live on my own terms. I had already given up my house, my savings, my relationship with my children. What was one more surrender? I need to get out of here, I said. I need to go somewhere they can't find me, where reporters can't camp on my lawn, where I don't have to defend every choice I make. Where will you go? I thought about that question. Where did a 73-year-old woman go when her entire life had imploded? When her family had turned against her and the media had turned her pain into entertainment? I don't know yet. But anywhere has to be better than here. After I hung up with Margaret, I walked through my house one more time, touching surfaces and straightening pictures like I was saying goodbye. In 47 years, these walls had witnessed every important moment of my adult life. Patrick's proposals, the children's first steps, birthday parties and Christmas mornings, and quiet Sunday afternoons when the biggest decision was what to have for dinner. Now those same walls would witness my departure. Not the gradual decline into a nursing home that my children had planned, but a deliberate exodus from a life that no longer fit me. I packed 2 suitcases with practical clothes and personal items. A few photographs, Patrick's wedding ring that I still wore on a chain around my neck, the small leather journal where I had written down favorite recipes and important phone numbers, and random thoughts that seemed worth preserving. I left everything else, the furniture Patrick and I had chosen together, the dishes we had received as wedding gifts, the books I had collected over decades of reading. Let the Maple Street Community Trust decide what to do with it all. Let my children fight over the remnants if they wanted to. The hardest thing to leave behind was Patrick's chair, the worn leather recliner where he had spent his evenings reading newspapers and watching baseball games. I sat in it one last time, running my hands over the armrests where his hands had rested for so many years, breathing in the faint scent of his cologne that still lingered in the fabric. "I'm sorry," I whispered to his memory. "I'm sorry I couldn't make it work with the kids. I'm sorry I couldn't keep our family together." But even as I apologized, I knew Patrick would have understood. He had seen how our children had changed over the years, how they had become more demanding and less grateful, more entitled and less respectful. He would have been heartbroken by their betrayal, but he wouldn't have blamed me for protecting myself. At 3 p.m, while the reporters were distracted by a delivery truck at the end of the street, I slipped out my back door with my suitcases and walked through Eleanor Henderson's backyard to the alley behind our houses. Eleanor was waiting by her back gate with her car keys in her hand. "You sure about this?" she asked, loading my suitcases into her trunk. "I'm sure." "Where are you going?" "South," I said. "Somewhere warm. Somewhere no one knows my name or my story." Eleanor drove me to the train station 3 towns over, taking back roads to avoid the media circus that had consumed my neighborhood. We didn't talk much during the drive. What was there to say? That I was running away from my own life? That I was abandoning everything I had ever known because the people who should have protected me had tried to destroy me instead? At the station, Eleanor hugged me tight, this neighbor who had become more of a family to me in my hour of need than my own children had been. "You take care of yourself, Connie Murphy," she said. "And don't you let anyone make you feel ashamed for choosing yourself over people who don't deserve you." I bought a ticket on the next train heading south, not caring about the destination, just needing to put distance between myself and the wreckage of my old life. As the train pulled away from the platform, I watched the familiar landscape of my hometown disappear behind me, taking with it 7 decades of memories and connections and roots that had anchored me to one place for so long. For the first time since Patrick's death, I was truly alone. No children to worry about, no neighbors to consider, no reporters to avoid. Just me, and 2 suitcases and a train ticket to somewhere new. The freedom was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. I rode that train for 18 hours, watching America pass by my window like scenes from someone else's life. Small towns and big cities, farmland and forests, mountains and rivers that had nothing to do with my story or my pain. I dozed fitfully in my seat, dreaming of Patrick, and waking to the gentle rocking motion of the train carrying me farther and farther from everything I had ever known. I got off in a small coastal town in North Carolina whose name I had picked at random from the station board. It was warm there, even in late October, with palm trees and ocean breezes and the kind of sleepy atmosphere that suggested people moved slowly and minded their own business. I found a small motel near the beach and paid for a week in advance, cash only, using my maiden name. The desk clerk was a kind woman in her 60s who didn't ask questions beyond whether I needed help with my bags. That first night, I walked to the beach and sat on the sand watching the sun set over the Atlantic Ocean. The water stretched endlessly toward the horizon, vast and indifferent to human drama. Waves rolled in and out with hypnotic regularity, erasing footprints and smoothing rough patches in the sand like nature's own reset button. I thought about my children, probably discovering by now that I had disappeared from my house and my life. Were they worried? Were they angry? Were they relieved that they no longer had to deal with their problematic mother? I thought about the court hearing I would miss on Monday morning, and the headlines that would probably follow. Elderly woman flees rather than face competency hearing. Missing grandmother sparks statewide search. Family feud ends in mysterious disappearance. Let them write their stories. Let them speculate about my mental state and my motivations. I was done being the subject of other people's narratives. For the first time in months, I felt something approaching peace. Over the following days, I established a simple routine in my temporary sanctuary. Morning walks on the beach, collecting shells and watching dolphins play in the waves. Afternoons reading in a small cafe where the owner made the best peach pie I had ever tasted. Evenings sitting on my motel room balcony, listening to the ocean, and thinking about what I wanted the rest of my life to look like. I bought clothes at a local thrift shop, casual things in bright colors that I never would have worn back home, flowing skirts and comfortable sandals and a sun hat that made me look like a tourist instead of someone fleeing from family drama. I had my hair cut short and styled differently, and when I looked in the mirror, I saw a stranger. Someone lighter, freer, unburdened by decades of other people's expectations. On my 5th day in town, I was having lunch at the cafe when a woman at the next table started a conversation. She was about my age, with silver hair and laugh lines around her eyes, and she was reading a mystery novel I had enjoyed months earlier. "How are you liking it?" I asked, nodding toward her book. "It's wonderful," she replied. "I love a good whodunit. Are you a mystery reader too?" We ended up talking for 2 hours about books and travel, and the pleasure of discovering new places. Her name was Joyce, and she was a retired teacher from Virginia who had moved to North Carolina after her husband died. She had bought a small cottage near the water and spent her days volunteering at the local library and tending to a garden she was still learning how to manage. "It's never too late to start over," she said when I mentioned that I was between homes myself. I thought I was too old to learn new things, make new friends, create a new life. But it turns out you're never too old to surprise yourself. That evening, I walked farther down the beach than I had before, past the tourist areas and vacation rentals to a quieter stretch where local families came to fish and watch the sunset. I found a piece of driftwood to sit on and called Margaret from my cell phone. "Connie, thank God. Where are you? Are you safe?" "I'm safe," I said. "I'm in North Carolina, a little town called Seaside Harbor. The whole state is looking for you. Your children filed a missing person report. There are search teams, helicopters, dive crews checking rivers and ponds." I felt a stab of guilt at the thought of strangers searching for me, resources being wasted on my dramatic exit. But then I remembered why I had left, and the guilt faded. "I'm not missing," I said. "I'm exactly where I want to be. They're saying you're having a mental breakdown, that you're confused and disoriented, and possibly dangerous to yourself." Of course they are. Because the only way they can explain my actions is to assume I'm crazy. Margaret was quiet for a moment. The competency hearing was postponed when you didn't appear. But Connie, they're not going to give up. Rebecca hired a private investigator to find you. Let them look. I'm not hiding from the law. I'm just choosing not to participate in their attempt to destroy what's left of my dignity. What's your plan? You can't run forever. I looked out at the ocean, watching a pelican dive for fish in the shallow water near the shore. What was my plan? For the first time in my adult life, I didn't have one. I didn't have obligations or responsibilities or people depending on me to be someone other than who I was. Maybe I don't want a plan, I said. Maybe I just want to live each day as it comes and see what happens. That doesn't sound like you. No, it doesn't. The old me always had a plan. The old me lived for other people, made decisions based on what was best for everyone else, sacrificed her own happiness for the sake of family harmony. But the old me got betrayed by the people she loved most. So maybe it's time to try being someone new. We talked for another 20 minutes, Margaret updating me on the legal proceedings I was avoiding and the media attention that was slowly dying down as other stories took precedence. When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades, the complete absence of obligation to anyone other than myself. I spent 2 more weeks in Seaside Harbor, extending my stay at the motel and deepening my friendship with Joyce, who introduced me to other women who had also reinvented themselves in their later years. A former banker who now taught art classes. A retired nurse who had started a small business selling handmade jewelry. A widow who had learned to sail at age 70 and now spent her days exploring the coastline in a small boat she had named Second Chance. These women had all faced their own losses and disappointments, their own moments of wondering if their lives were over. But instead of giving up, they had chosen to begin again. They had discovered that ending one chapter didn't mean the story was finished. On my last night at the motel, I called David. I had been thinking about him constantly, remembering our last conversation when he had sounded so young and broken. Of all my children, he seemed the most genuinely remorseful, the most aware of how much damage had been done. Grandma? His voice was thick with emotion. Where are you? Are you okay? I'm fine, sweetheart. I'm somewhere safe and beautiful, and I'm figuring out what comes next. Please come home. Please, we can work this out. We can fix everything. Can we? Can you undo the fact that you and your siblings tried to have me declared incompetent? Can you take back the threats and the manipulation and the complete disregard for what I wanted? We were wrong. We were so wrong. But running away isn't the answer. I'm not running away, David. I'm running towards something. I just don't know what it is yet. We talked for an hour, both of us crying, both of us trying to find a bridge across the chasm that had opened between us. He told me about the guilt that was eating him alive, about how he couldn't sleep or eat or concentrate on anything except the knowledge that he had betrayed the person who had loved him most. I told him about the peace I had found by the ocean, about the possibility of starting over, about the women I had met who had shown me that life could begin again at any age. I love you, he said before we hung up. I know I don't deserve it, but I love you, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to make up for what I did. I love you too, I replied, but love isn't enough anymore. Trust has to be earned back, and I don't know if that's possible. The next morning, I checked out of the motel and took a taxi to a real estate office I had noticed during my walks around town. The agent was a cheerful woman named Susan, who specialized in helping retirees find their perfect coastal retreat. I'm looking for a small place, I told her. Something I can afford with a modest pension and Social Security. Nothing fancy, just a place where I can watch the ocean and read books and maybe learn to grow vegetables. We spent the day looking at cottages and condos, tiny houses and converted apartments. Nothing felt quite right until we walked into a small bungalow 3 blocks from the beach. It was painted yellow with white shutters, surrounded by a garden that was overgrown but full of potential. The inside was simple but charming, with hardwood floors and large windows that let in the coastal light. The previous owner was an elderly gentleman who passed away last month, Susan explained. His family is eager to sell quickly, so they're very motivated on price. I walked through the small rooms, imagining myself making coffee in the sunny kitchen, reading in the window seat that overlooked the garden, falling asleep to the sound of waves in the distance. For the first time since Patrick's death, I could picture myself truly at home somewhere. "I'll take it," I said. The paperwork was surprisingly simple. I had enough money left from a small insurance policy Patrick had kept separate from our joint accounts, money my children hadn't known about and couldn't touch. It wasn't much, but it was enough for a down payment on a new life. I moved into my yellow bungalow on a Tuesday morning in November, carrying my 2 suitcases and a box of groceries I had bought at the local market. The house was empty except for a few pieces of furniture the previous owner's family had left behind, but it felt fuller than my old house had in years. That afternoon, Joyce arrived with a casserole and a bottle of wine to help me celebrate. We sat on my small back porch, watching the sun filter through the oak trees that bordered my property, talking about the garden I wanted to plant, and the books I wanted to read, and the quiet adventures I was planning. "Any regrets?" she asked. I thought about that question seriously. Did I regret protecting myself from my children's greed? Did I regret refusing to be warehoused in a nursing home against my will? Did I regret walking away from a legal battle that would have required me to prove my sanity to a courtroom full of strangers? "No," I said finally. No regrets about the big decisions. Some sadness about how things ended with my family, but no regrets about choosing myself for once. And what about the future? Any plans? I'm thinking about volunteering at the library. Maybe taking a cooking class, learning to make some of those dishes I always wanted to try but never had time for. There's a community garden downtown where I could rent a plot and learn to grow my own vegetables. Sounds like you're going to be busy living instead of just surviving. There's a difference. That night, I called Margaret to give her my new address and phone number. She was relieved to know I was safe and settled, but concerned about the legal loose ends I had left behind. What about the competency hearing? What about your children's claims? Let them pursue it if they want to. They can have their day in court arguing that I'm mentally incompetent while I'm down here living my best life. The irony should be apparent to anyone with half a brain. And if they find you, if they try to force you to return, they can't force me to do anything. I'm an adult, and I've broken no laws. I've simply chosen to live somewhere else. What if they come to North Carolina? I looked around my small living room, at the windows that framed the setting sun, at the empty spaces I would fill with new memories and experiences and discoveries. Then I'll deal with that when it happens. But for now, I'm going to focus on being Connie Murphy. Not anyone's mother or daughter or victim. Just me, for the first time in 73 years. A year later, I was working in my garden when a car pulled into my driveway. I looked up from the tomatoes I was staking to see David getting out of a rental car, his face uncertain and hopeful at the same time. My first instinct was to run inside and lock the door, to protect the peace I had built in this small coastal town. But then I saw how thin he looked, how much older he seemed, and my grandmother's heart overrode my self-preservation instincts. "David?" I said, pulling off my gardening gloves. "Hi, Grandma." He stood by his car like he wasn't sure he was welcome to come closer. "You look good. Happy." "I am happy. What are you doing here?" "I wanted to see you, to talk to you, to try to make things right if that's possible." I studied his face, looking for signs of the manipulation and false concern that had driven me away from my family. But all I saw was genuine remorse and a desperate hope for forgiveness. "Come sit on the porch," I said. "I'll make some sweet tea." We talked for 3 hours, sitting in the rocking chairs I had bought at a local antique shop, watching the sun move across my garden. He told me about the past year, about the guilt that had consumed him, about how he had quit his job and started seeing a therapist to deal with what he called the worst thing I've ever done. He told me about Rebecca and Michael, how they had doubled down on their claims that I was mentally ill, how they had hired lawyers and private investigators and refused to accept that I had simply chosen to leave, how they had fought the property transfer and lost, how they had pursued the competency hearing without me and been told by the judge that there was no case without evidence of actual mental impairment. "They're angry," he said. "Angry at you for leaving, angry at me for not supporting them, angry at the whole situation. But I think underneath the anger, they're ashamed. They know what they did was wrong, but they're too proud to admit it. And you? I asked. Are you ashamed? Every day. Every single day, I wake up remembering what I did to the person who loved me most in the world. I don't know how to live with that. I rocked quietly for a moment, listening to the sound of wind chimes on my neighbor's porch and the distant crash of waves on the shore. This man sitting beside me was my grandson, the child I had raised and loved and worried about. But he was also someone who had tried to steal my independence and dignity for his own convenience. I have built a good life here, I said finally. I have friends, I volunteer at the library, I grow my own vegetables and read books and take long walks on the beach. I'm happier than I've been in years. I'm glad. You deserve to be happy. The question is, what do you want from me now? Forgiveness? A relationship? Money? He flinched at the last word. Not money, never again. I miss you. I miss having you in my life. I miss being able to call you when something good happens, or when I need advice, or just when I want to hear your voice. I miss you too, I admitted. But missing someone and trusting them are two different things. I know I have to earn your trust back, and I know it might take years, or it might never happen. But I'm willing to try if you'll let me. I looked at this young man who had caused me so much pain, who had broken my heart and driven me from my home, and made me question whether the people I loved most could ever really love me back. He looked sincere, remorseful, desperate for redemption, but I had been fooled by sincerity before. I don't know, I said honestly. I don't know if I can open myself up to being hurt like that again. I understand, but Grandma, could I maybe visit sometimes? Not to ask for anything, not to try to change your mind about anything, just to spend time with you, to show you that I'm different now. I thought about it for a long time, weighing the risk of letting him back into my life against the loneliness that still sometimes crept in during the long evenings when I missed having family to call. You can visit, I said finally, but there are conditions. No trying to convince me to move back home. No involving Rebecca or Michael without my permission. No making decisions about my life or my future. And if you betray my trust again, even once, it's over forever. He agreed to my terms with tears in his eyes, and we spent the rest of his visit talking about safe topics. My garden, his new job, the books we were reading, the small pleasures of daily life that had nothing to do with money or property or family obligations. When he left, he hugged me carefully, like I was made of glass. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for giving me a chance. Don't make me regret it, I replied. That was 6 months ago. David has visited 3 more times since then, always respectful, always careful not to overstep the boundaries I established. He brings me books and helps with yard work, and listens to my stories about the life I've built, without trying to change or judge or improve it. I don't know if we'll ever have the relationship we used to have. I don't know if I'll ever fully trust him again. But I've learned that some relationships can survive betrayal if both people are willing to work at rebuilding them, one careful conversation at a time. Rebecca and Michael haven't contacted me at all. According to David, they're still angry, still convinced that I'm the villain in this story. Maybe someday they'll realize what they lost when they tried to control me instead of loving me. Maybe they won't. Either way, it's not my problem anymore. I'm 74 now, living in my yellow bungalow by the sea, surrounded by friends who chose me for who I am rather than what I could give them. I grow tomatoes and read mysteries and volunteer at the library story time, where children listen to my voice and don't care about my age or my family drama or my complicated history. Sometimes I think about Patrick and wonder what he would think of the woman I've become. Independent, a little stubborn, unwilling to sacrifice my happiness for other people's convenience. I think he would be proud of me for finally learning to put myself first. Sometimes I think about the house on Maple Street, now preserved as a historical landmark, hosting tours and community events and serving purposes I never could have imagined when Patrick and I first walked through its empty rooms. I gave it away to save myself, But in doing so, I gave it a kind of immortality that my family never could have provided. And sometimes I think about the choice I made that October day when my children tried to steal my future, and I fought back with everything I had. It cost me almost everything I thought I valued, but it gave me something I hadn't even known I was missing: the freedom to be myself. I'm not the same woman who stood in her kitchen making apple cinnamon bread while her family planned her exile. I'm not the victim who packed her suitcases with trembling hands while her children watched with cold eyes. I'm not the grandmother who begged for forgiveness from people who saw her as nothing more than an obstacle to their inheritance. I'm Connie Murphy, and I chose myself. I chose dignity over family harmony, independence over security, truth over comfortable lies. It was the hardest choice I ever made, and the best one. The sun is setting over the ocean as I write this, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that take my breath away every single evening. Tomorrow I'll wake up in my own bed, in my own house, in the life I chose for myself when everyone else tried to choose for me. And that, I've learned, is worth everything I gave up to get here. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.